All right, I'd like to introduce everybody to Mike Colman. Mike Colman is an alum of San Diego State University. He stayed connected with the university pretty much right away. It's been a big booster for our athletic program. Started his career at General Dynamics and then moved over to Qualcomm, where he was there for many years. 20, 30? Almost 30 years. He retired recently. But in his retirement, he's already taken up a new gig where he's supporting SDSU again through a company called Aztec Link. So Mike, why don't we get started? Tell us a little bit about what you do for Aztec Link and maybe help the students know what Aztec Link is as an organization.
Yeah, so Aztec Link is an NIL collective that supports the student athletes working to monetize their name, image, and likeness. So it's a very new kind of area that has the legislation passed, I think 2 years ago. Aztec Link was formed about a year ago, but really we've been trying to get it up and running. I would say the last 6 months has really been where we've made a ton of progress on getting that up and running. And the goal is to be able to support all of the student athletes. We're kind of just building on that. We've built a 3-year plan to say what we want the collective to be, and then now it's a matter of driving kind of short-term goals to get things moving.
All right, and your role in operations director, you also sit on the board of directors. So tell us a little bit of what you do on a day-to-day basis and from an operations standpoint, and how does that correlate with your role in board?
Yeah, so this is really like a startup. So I wear a ton of different hats, and every day is completely different. But I really am trying to take the knowledge that I had from Qualcomm in regards to how to not just try and solve the problem today, but to say, okay, where do we want to be in 2 or 3 years, and make sure that we've got processes in place. So it was like the first, I'd say, 2 months that I was involved in this. It was kind of like, let's take a step back and kind of talk to a lot of people, figure out what other collectives are doing, what companies are in this space that are trying to provide support to NIL collectives before we kind of just say, here's what we're going to go do. And so we took that opportunity to I'd just like to say kind of like, let's figure out what the foundation looks like, because we need to make sure that that's solid before we build on top of it. So yeah, it's really kind of just, everything from defining our processes, establishing the board of directors that we have for Aztec Link, and then really just working with student athletes to kind of show them, hey, here's our plan for being able to allow you to monetize your name, image, and likeness. But literally every day is completely different, and so different than what I was doing before in regards to I'm learning every day, which is really, really cool. It's exciting.
And the name, image, and likeness is a new frontier for athletics, because for years NCAA did not allow students to do that, but recent court rulings kind of changed the layout of that. So you're looking into a new frontier. How do you even go about doing it?
Yeah, it's exciting. It's kind of challenging but exciting at the same time, because there's not really an established process, so we can make decisions and kind of go, here's what we're going to do, and we may course correct a little bit, but we're trying to at least make sure that the road that we're going to drive down is solid, and then we can kind of course correct. But yeah, it's absolutely, and there's a lot of businesses that are trying to get involved in the space as well. So we spent a lot of time just talking to people, kind of understanding what was out there. I'd say the first 6-8 weeks of being involved.
Yeah. So you worked your way up to VP of Operations at Qualcomm. Very different role than your director of operations now. Can you talk a little bit about it? We recently took some grad students, some of them are here, out to visit and see the semiconductor chips that you guys produce out there. It's just completely fascinating. Just tell us a little bit about it.
Yeah, so when I started at Qualcomm, it was still a fairly small company, and then evolved into a very large company. And I think the biggest difference is, well, first off, Qualcomm, even today, is still very entrepreneurial and engineering driven. And I think that's one of the things that I loved about it, is it was a big company, but it felt like a smaller entrepreneurial company. But it still was large, where, compared to what I'm doing now, where, I'm wearing a lot of different hats, you did kind of have, you felt like you were a spoke in the wheel at Qualcomm, right? You had your responsibilities. It was clear what you needed to do, but at the same point, what you were doing built on what other people were doing. Where what we're doing now is so different. So I really kind of consider it, a large entrepreneurial company versus a startup. And it was interesting too, because I had when I started thinking about leaving Qualcomm, I felt like I wanted to give back, and I wanted to be involved in something where it was more kind of a startup company. I had no idea that I left Qualcomm on a Friday, and Monday I was on multiple calls for Aztec Link and getting involved, and I had no idea that it would happen that quickly. But totally have found my sweet spot right now, because it really marries up my love of Aztec athletics and my operational experience that I have.
Yeah, and the centers that you were above, the engineering development center and the engineering test center, they're kind of at the heart of enabling R&D at Qualcomm. We discussed on our trip there, kind of what the life cycle was for all of that. But why don't you just tell us, what were the top priorities that you had, in overseeing operations of the center?
Yeah, it really was to make sure that the engineers had the tools that they needed to be able to do their job, right? In operations, you're a support organization for engineering, and that's the lifeblood of the company. And a lot of times what would end up happening is the engineers would be designing, let's say, a new chip, and of course it's super complex. And so they would run into challenges, and let's say we're supposed to get the first chips, December 1st. Well, things happen, and all of a sudden December 1st turns into December 15th. Well, our end goal of being able to get those chips into hardware, tested, and into the engineer's hands, that date didn't change. So we had to then look at it and go, how do we shave time off of our operational cycle time in order to be able to still meet the schedule? And that was probably the biggest challenge was, we had to, jump through a ton of hoops to make sure that our schedules weren't impacted. That was what was fun, but also, very stressful kind of environment.
Yeah, Madeline, who you introduced us to, said that her three main responsibilities were quality, cost, and the schedule that we just mentioned. What about on the quality and the cost side? What were kind of the key challenges that we had to face?
Yeah, so I would say quality was kind of a given, because if we had issues with quality, and let's say we delivered hardware into the engineer's hands, and then the engineers found a problem, they would then have to question whether it was a hardware issue or if it was a chip issue or a software issue. And we wanted to make sure that it was never a hardware issue. And I think we had done an amazing job of making sure that never, it wasn't the first thing that came to the engineer's mind when they had a problem was, oh, maybe a hardware issue. So I think that one was kind of we had to make sure that was just a given, that hardware was up to the standards that was required. And then I think for a cost perspective, and this was something that came up probably more often than I would have liked, but people said, well, why are you manufacturing hardware? So what we would get, just so everybody kind of understands, is, Qualcomm produces the chips that go into every one of your cell phones. But Qualcomm also sold it as a whole ecosystem. So you had to make sure that the cellular modem that communicates to the cell towers works, the application processors, the power management chips, and Qualcomm produced all those chips. And so the kind of secret sauce is being able to make sure that that's optimized within the phone. So Qualcomm would take all those chips, they would give them to us, and they would say, you put these on a circuit card, put it into a phone form factor, and give it to the engineers. And so there was a lot of, and it would come up probably every 3 or 4 years. Well, why are you doing this manufacturing, Sereno Valley, everybody would say La Jolla, California, why are you doing this? And so there was always a focus, and especially when new people would come in and they would go, why aren't you building this stuff in Taiwan or China? And the answer really was we needed to be able to quickly iterate the hardware, because there were always changes that were coming down, and you couldn't do that and be able to support the engineers in a way that we need to support. So we had to, from a cost perspective, make sure that our costs were low enough where that we could answer that question, and somebody would come in and say, why are you doing this manufacturing? We'd explain the technical reasons, but at the same point, we need to make sure that from a cost perspective, we were as competitive as possible. But it was absolutely a differentiator for Qualcomm having that capability in-house, where because other chip companies, they may produce, let's say, the applications processor or pieces, the power management chip. They didn't do the full solution that Qualcomm did, and so having the ability to be able to produce that hardware in-house was absolutely a game changer.
Yeah, and as you mentioned, Qualcomm grew from being such a small company that actually wasn't focused so much on the chips in the beginning.
Yep.
Produced, phones themselves, for instance, rather than just the chips. But I would say that Qualcomm has come to, even though you have competitors, to really dominate that market. If you own a cell phone, you probably have a smart Qualcomm chip in there. If you own a Samsung, you got close to 30 in there from Qualcomm. So you're such so integrated into all of these different devices. What really was the bet for Qualcomm to grow from a small company that was doing something slightly different than focusing on, okay, we're going to do these chips where we're going to be the leader?
Yeah. So it really kind of started out really early when I was in my career at Qualcomm. Qualcomm was producing a satellite communication system for the trucking industry, and you still see them on the long haul trucks. So this little dome up on the top of the cab, and that allowed communication from a hub to the trucks, and they could get diagnostics on the truck back to the hub. They could communicate messaging out. And this was like in the 80s, late 80s, early 90s. And then Qualcomm said, hey, we have this capability to be able to take technology and really, at the time, this was very early, the transition from analog cellular to digital cellular, and Qualcomm said, we've got a way to be able to really optimize this transition to digital cellular. But there were a lot of people, because there had already been decisions on the technology roadmap, and it didn't include Qualcomm's technology. So early on, there were literally days when you'd see a press release in the morning saying this technology can't work, and there were big companies that were saying it would never work, to the afternoon saying this was going to be a world-changing technology. So it was very much a roller coaster. But Erwin Jacobs, our CEO at the time, super smart, like an amazing person, not only as an engineer, but as a business person and just a leader, right? Somebody that you could have a conversation with that, would be like, oh, I'm talking to the CEO and he's talking, he knows what I'm doing, he knows what the role is. So I think, his vision of what needed to happen, and then Qualcomm proved that not only does the technology work, but that it can scale to, where we are today with, millions and millions of devices and the technology. So that's kind of the the evolution of what happened with Qualcomm. I don't know if I answered your question.
No, absolutely. So we were kind of looking into what led to that success of dominating the market, and it's really kind of that philosophy that looks like that led there.
Yeah, and let me add one other thing too, because Qualcomm also, because they wanted to be able to optimize the full solution. We did originally, or Qualcomm did, keep saying we, started building base stations, and they started building phones in order to be able to make sure that the whole system worked. And then Qualcomm, once we figured out that, yep, the infrastructure is good, they sold off the infrastructure division, and then the same with phones, because it was like, you don't need to be involved in this, like let experts go and manufacture those pieces. Now, the chip side has always been, the kind of a core competency that, Qualcomm has said we need to keep that in-house. And that's really, where the kind of the intellectual property is the chips that are in the phone. That's really what Qualcomm kind of said, that's where we focus on technology.
Yeah, and when I asked you about what you do as VP of Ops for Qualcomm, you started off with, my job is to make sure that the engineers have their tools. And it sounds like what we've learned here at San Diego State is a service model of leadership. Is that something that you feel like you developed on your own, or is that something that Qualcomm believes in and develops their leaders into that philosophy?
I'd say it's a little of both. I mean, definitely Qualcomm. That's it's an organization where you have to rely on other people to get your job done efficiently, and kind of building the relationships around how you can get the job done most effectively. Yeah, I absolutely think that that's something that is ingrained in the culture of Qualcomm, but it's also something that I kind of feel just is important, just personally. So I think it was a little of both.
When I took the students to visit last week to Qualcomm, we also got to tour the museum where we saw that Qualcomm developed its own car from the ground up.
Yeah.
And it also, developed the chip components for the Mars rover and the little helicopter that takes pictures up there on Mars. What's the coolest project you were a part of?
Well, I don't even know that I could say one over the other, but yeah, I mean, the Mars thing was really cool to hear, because we had people from NASA that kind of came and talked to us, and just to hear, and that was a product that we produced in our operation there, and to hear them talk about the fact that it really started as this, hey, we're going to try and fly it one time or two times, and then I don't know how many missions it ended up flying, but it was a ton. Like it was a huge success, and to know that we were part of something that not the scale that is incredible, but we had hardware that went to Mars. So that's probably the one that I would say. But there's so many, I don't even know that I can single one.
Yeah, and the prototype that we built, not you personally, but Qualcomm built for use was kind of demonstrating the technology where we can put the brains of our chips into future vehicles. Are we going to soon see Qualcomm in every car around?
Yeah, a lot of cars already have Qualcomm chips. So there's like the infotainment. We have content, or Qualcomm has content in infotainment, autonomous driving. There's a lot of work done there. Collision avoidance, all that stuff. So yeah, I mean, and Qualcomm has kind of said, hey, we want to make sure that we diversify, and so get into IoT, Internet of Things, automotive, a lot of different areas. Because think of how many, like if you looked at your life, 5 years ago, you may have had your cell phone, you may have had a laptop with a connected wireless. But now it's like your thermostat, there's your car is connected. There's so many things that are connected to the internet, and that's all technology is being able to connect things to the internet, and so that's just exploded over the last 5-10 years.
Yeah, and remind me, what was your major?
That's kind of an interesting story. So I went to junior college for 2.5 years, and I was kind of undecided coming into San Diego State. So I started out as a business major, but I had done none of the undergrad, business classes. So I grew up in Central California, and I moved down to San Diego, and just the fact that you're in this environment away from home for the first time, and I was taking accounting, business law, business communication, calculus, and I did not do well. So I kind of pivoted at that time. I went and talked to a counselor and kind of said, hey, what can I do? Here's what I have in my lower division stuff. And so I pivoted to public administration. And I wanted to be in city planning, was what my degree was, public administration with an emphasis in city planning. And I loved the classes. Like I really was like, this is what I want to do. I want to get into city planning. But then I had an internship my last semester here at San Diego State, at the city of Oceanside. And boy, was that eye-opening, right? It was a bureaucratic organization and not a lot of innovation. And I was like, holy smokes, here's my degree. This is what I thought I was going to do. And yeah, I was like, wow, I gotta find another pathway, because I don't want to work in city government. So
yeah, so then you graduate and you take a position as a purchasing manager at General Dynamics. How did that happen?
Yeah, so this is another interesting story. So I had a friend that worked at General Dynamics, and at the time they were one of the biggest employers in San Diego, defense contractor doing the group that I was working in, did test equipment for the F-16 airplane. And so I kind of got connected into the hiring manager, and it was the most surreal kind of interview process. So I go in, it's a Friday, and Tim Murphy was the hiring manager, and it was during the World Series. It was October, and we got talking about baseball, and he loved baseball, and we chatted for probably 20 minutes about nothing related to work, and just connected and really had a good conversation. And then he spent maybe 10 minutes, kind of looking over my resume, asking me a few questions, and then he's like, okay, so here's what's going to happen. You're going to talk to Joyce McGee, and she's going to probably ask you questions in this area. You're going to talk to Joel Stan. I remember all these people's names too, which is amazing. And he's going to ask about this, talk about this project that you worked on and what you did there. And we're walking out of the conference room, and he goes, Monday, we're going to make you a job. I haven't even interviewed with higher level people. And sure enough, I remember calling my mom, after the interview, and I go, I've been going on all these interviews, and this was the strangest one, right? I mean, we didn't really talk about a lot of, my resume. It was more around just getting connected, and having a great conversation with Tim. And sure enough, Monday they called and made a job offer. And I think the thing I took out of that is you've got to be well-rounded, right? You've got to be able to, have a conversation with people that are not necessarily the technical aspects of what you're studying. So yeah, a couple of interesting, pathways in my career that, were very,
Well, in my role, I'm lucky to have a lot of conversations like those. I remember sitting down with the CEO of Spy Optics and listening to his story about cycling with Lance Armstrong for an hour before he talked about anything else. But I learned in my early days that being able to connect with somebody is probably one of the most important things you can do for a job. So I'm sure when you had that interview, you fit a piece of the puzzle that they were looking for, and it didn't matter necessarily the technical skills you have; they can teach you that. Yeah. So with that said, you go over to Qualcomm about 4.5 years later, probably to an even more technical role than you had at General Dynamics, although they're a very technical company too. How do you navigate that with your background and your experience?
Yeah, so I'll add kind of one of the things that drove me to do this transition. So General Dynamics was very structured. It was a union kind of operation, but I had a exposure. They wanted to merge the buyers and the planners in the organization. So we did this buyer planner kind of prototype team, and we were pretty much, there were 4 of us that said, you guys, now we're going to take you off your current role. You guys go figure out how to do this, and then come back with the solution of how do we do it. And it was amazing because it was like, wow, we can actually, come up with the best solution. And the people that I worked with on that project were incredible. So we did that and kind of got to the end of it. And it's like, I really want to get involved in something like that, right? Where it's not as structured, that you have the ability to be able to truly make decisions on your own. So that was and then my boss at the time moved over to Qualcomm. And so I was talking to her, and I'm like, hey, there's opportunity. And so that's how I originally got over to Qualcomm. But Qualcomm was such a different environment then because it was a super small company, and we were doing a lot of different, it was still, I think when I hired on, there was maybe 800 employees or something. So it wasn't a startup, but it was definitely small. And because we were involved in so many different technologies, it was really easy to kind of get involved in different things, which really helped to kind of bridge the gap. And then to get back to your question, yeah, I've always been, not being an engineer, and at Qualcomm, that's all I dealt with. And what I find working with engineers is they want to be engineers. They don't want to deal with the operational stuff or even a lot of things that are even close to operation. And so if you could prove to them that, hey, I can take care of a lot of the other stuff, let you focus on engineering and let me handle all the other stuff. And once you prove yourself to do that, they want to give you opportunities. And so that's kind of the way I kind of transitioned into with engineers. I love working with them. I mean, they're especially the engineers at Qualcomm, brilliant people. And whatever I can do to help, was kind of the way I looked at my role.
Working for a company for almost 30 years, that's a hard feat these days. And especially since companies go up and down in their cycles as far as, how is the economy doing and things like that. But not only were you able to stay at Qualcomm for that long, but you were able to keep moving up, director, senior director, VP. What would you kind of say is the key to your success to advance within that organization?
So I like to say that I had really 4 different careers at Qualcomm. So I started in the procurement area when Qualcomm, from a chip perspective, really started to take off, and it was before the evolution of 4G. You guys are all aware of 5G. This was the evolution 10 years before. And I had the opportunity to kind of pivot out of procurement into a supply chain role, and we were trying to establish all of our partners that we're going to, because Qualcomm's a fabless chip company, so we don't own the actual manufacturing. And so I had this opportunity to be part of complete rocket ship during the 4G and really kind of defining how the supply chain was going to work. And so I did that so my first procurement experience was maybe 6-7 years. On the chip side was probably 7 or 8 years. And what I started to realize is I want to do different things. I want to be able to get exposed to different things. So, and I think too, the experience in the chip side was something that probably was not sustainable health-wise because it was a meat grinder of a role, and I had young kids at the time. And so I'm kind of like, okay, I'm going to go find something else to do. And I started to socialize the fact that, I wanted to go do something different. And I had another director or VP reach out, and he's like, hey, don't leave Qualcomm. He goes, I have this other role for you in Brent, the area that does the chip testing, internal chip testing. And he goes, I'd like to have you in this role. And he goes, it's really small. I just need you to do this one piece. I'm like, man, that sounds great. I can go learn new things. I can be involved in a role that will be less scope. And so I get over there and this kind of tended to happen. I get over there and I prove myself in that piece, and then it's like, here's this other piece. And before I knew it, I had was responsible for the whole operation. And then again, 6, 7, 8 years later, I'm like, hey, I've optimized things here. I want to go do something different. And again, I started to socialize again. Maybe I'll go find another startup company to work for. And had literally, I had socialized with my wife. I'm like, yeah, it's time. I want to go out of Qualcomm and do something different. And she had her mind around it. And I get a call, I'd already given my notice that I was leaving. I got a call from another VP within Qualcomm. He's like, hey, I got this role, and it's really small. I just need you to take the procurement and planning. Those guys aren't communicating. I need, somebody to kind of make sure that, those teams are working together. And that sounds pretty cool. Here I have this opportunity, less scope, opportunity to learn new things, and same thing happened. I get over there, I show that I can do that. And then he's like, yeah, I take the whole operation. And so, yeah, it's, it didn't feel like I worked for the same company for 30 years because it was truly important. So I think part of the reason that I was successful is I had those experiences in different areas, and I had context, right? Because a lot of this is establishing relationships that you can then, hey, I need some help here. I can help you in this area, right? It's all about the network that you build. And I felt like I had connections in every aspect of Qualcomm. When people needed help, they come to me, hey, do you know somebody over in this area? Yeah, I know this person. I worked with them for 7 years in this other role. And so I had these connections that really allowed me to, I think, be successful. And I think the other thing too, as far as the kind of the move to VP is we had I mentioned earlier these discussions about divesting our group outside of Qualcomm, and there was a big push probably 5 or 6 years ago to do that, right? We were under significant cost pressure, and I had to be the one to really. There were pockets of people within Qualcomm that were like, "This is going to happen," right? And I was the one that had to give a balanced, say, here's the risks, and it goes back to having this core competency within Qualcomm. And to be able to show financially that really the benefits that they thought they were going to get, weren't going to get. So I think I put myself in a position where I just wanted to do the right thing, right? I had no agenda, and I think I got a lot of credibility out of that because I'm just here are the facts. If that's the decision, I just want you to know going in what the risks are, and that maybe the way you're looking at the cost isn't the benefits that you're really going to get. And I think that really helped to kind of, because at that point I had exposure to the CEO and the CFO and a lot of people that I didn't directly have line of sight to before. But and I think I had a lot of credibility just to be able to say I have no agenda in this, because again they knew that it was like I'm not looking to do this for any reason other than I want the right thing for the company to happen. And thank goodness that we went on the table and we didn't do it, because at that point it was right when we were launching 5G. And imagine divesting that kind of core competency at a point where you're producing all this new super complex technology. So Qualcomm made the right decision.
Yeah, and I don't want to oversimplify, but I want to kind of summarize, these keys to your success. So you were able to build a brand while you were there. You weren't afraid to speak your mind, so people knew, how you thought, what your actions were. They trusted you because you probably were right a good percentage of the time. You weren't afraid to tell people what you wanted. So you're talking about socializing the idea of moving on. So you weren't afraid to tell people what it was you wanted to go in your career, even though they were your peers. The right people got to know you, right? Probably through that brand, but the right people got to know you, and so then rather than let you leave, they send you offers to do the things that you said that you wanted to do. So that's a pretty amazing story. What about our students, right? I'm sure some of them out there want to work at Qualcomm. Maybe we have an engineer or two in this room, but not a lot of engineers. What can these students here do to get Qualcomm to consider them for roles within the organization?
Yeah, I think the key thing is you're going to come out with an amazing education. And I think the key is kind of building that network. And I see people that try and build the network of really, you can see that the goal is to get a job. And I would say do that a little differently, right? Establish the relationship, get to know people, have discussions without I'm having this discussion to get a job, right? I'm having this discussion to establish, a relationship, get to know you, and those kind of things. I think that to me is one of the things that I would highly recommend. And then I think getting involved in this, right? Do internships, and you guys do it, I'm sure. I've had an interaction with a lot of students, and you guys do a great job of getting people out in the community. We've done projects with Greg's MBA students, and the collaboration that you guys are doing with teams and stuff. I think that you guys are coming out with the right skills, and the key is just make sure that you've got solid network. Because a lot of jobs are not, hey, I'm going on Indeed and I'm applying. It's like, hey, I know somebody over here that may have an opportunity, and having that established network is super important.
Qualcomm was born here in San Diego, so we're proud of Erwin Jacobs and the history of Qualcomm here. And the headquarters continues to be here, but you're an international company. You've got footprints in other parts of the world, and you can certainly use skills from our international business students and global business development. What would you say, if students wanted to contribute to Qualcomm, at that level, what are the skills they should bring with them?
Well, let me start out by saying I built 2 teams that were So I had teams in San Diego, but I also built a team when I was on the chip side in Singapore, and a team in Taiwan when I was in my last role. And the key for me is, you know, there were managers within Qualcomm that wanted to kind of directly control these operations, right? And I looked at it differently. I looked at it and I said, I want to hire a great person in country. I want to spend the time educating them on, you know, what's important, kind of spend the time to develop them, but then let them lead, you know, in that country. And I felt like that gave, because each one of these areas has different kind of culture and kind of the way that they run businesses, and I didn't want to be, you know, kind of the one that was dictating you must do it this way. So I think that was always my approach in dealing with you know, my offshore teams. But I think, you know, if you look at kind of the skills, I think that it's very similar, right? It's you know having those connections, you know, being able to kind of, you know, differentiate yourself from an experience perspective on things that you've learned. And you know, I would also say too, get involved in as many things as possible, right? Make sure your toolbox that you have is really diverse. That's probably the other thing. So I don't know that it's significantly different between, you know, here and, you know, if you were, you know, applying for a position that Qualcomm in another country. And I think it's all about kind of the networking and making sure that you got a whole tool belt of skills.
As you said, you're pretty experienced putting together teams, whether they're international or local here. Are there any interviews that kind of stand out to you? What was it that person did to help set them apart? Say, I got to hire this person.
Yeah, so over the last probably 10 or 15 years, I was always the last interview, right? And typically I was the one just to make sure that the person was a fit, right? If it got to me, the rest of the team was already, you know, this is the person that we want to hire. So I always looked at, so I didn't really get super technical in those discussions because I figured the people that, you know, interviewed before me, you know, touched on all that stuff. And if it got to me that technically they had the skills. I was always looking for kind of the ability to be able to integrate into the team, because that's huge. The dynamic of bringing somebody onto a team and having them not be able to integrate is a huge issue. So that was always something that I would try and kind of ask questions. And so I think that the key thing is, you know, how do you show that you're you know, not only a good teammate, but somebody that really can kind of build up the team, or, you know, kind of increase the efficiency of the team. And then the other thing that I would always focus on is something random on the resume, right? Something that is not related. And maybe it goes back to my discussion with Tim Murphy, but, you know, something random, and then tell me why that's on your resume and give me more information, because I think you learn more about people because you're not focused on here's the maybe more technical or business skills that they have, but why is you know, being, you know, captain of the water polo team, you know, what did you learn out of that experience? And you know, why, you know, different questions around some of those experiences to get to know the person more on a personal level rather than business level.
All right. For our students that they're not necessarily looking to work at Qualcomm and they're already working out in the community, but just want to move up. You know, they want to become a manager, they want to become a director. What advice would you give them to help them, their bosses, see that the value in them and offer them a promotion in the way that you got?
That's a good question. I would say I've always lived by kind of the motto of you don't ask for a promotion. Like I've had people that have come in, well, what do I do? Or when am I going to get my promotion? Or what do I, and I think I always looked at it that I want to ask what else I can be doing, right? Where else can I add value to the organization? Because the more that you can make yourself indispensable, the promotions are going to come. And again, maybe I was just in the right spot at the right time to be able to get promoted. But I always looked at it that was the way that I was going to ask that question. Because there's different ways you can ask that question. And I never, when somebody would come in and ask the question of, when am I getting promoted, or I was always like, that's the wrong question. So I would say that would be something that I would say is where else can I, increase my skills in order to make myself more valuable to the organization, would be probably where I would focus and get as much experience in different areas, because it makes a huge difference if you are able to not just see, here's what I need to do in my role, but here's how my role relates to, the other roles. And I think, as I really saw it when I was in the supply chain role of how important what I was doing, to, the demand management team or the quality team, right? And you could start to see, man, if I kind of optimize my process without looking at the people that are providing input or people providing output to, you're not going to be successful. So I think the more you can learn about those kind of adjacent areas are super important.
I had a few more questions, that I was going to ask about AI and stuff like that, but I think I'd rather let our students get some questions in. But before I do, is there any other piece of advice that you would like to share with our students who are aspiring to enter the workforce?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is probably a fairly challenging time to enter the workforce with, but especially on the tech side, reduction in force, but I would say kind of just keep looking. Number one, I mentioned it, you're coming out of here with an absolutely great education, and whatever you do, think of it as kind of the building blocks. It's like, okay, I don't have this job that I really want. I'm going to take this other job and look at it and say, man, I'm going to use this as an opportunity to be able to, again, learn things so that then when the right job does, what you see as more of the long-term fit comes available, you haven't just been, kind of just doing a job. You've been, hey, I'm very kind of focused on, what I'm going to learn out of this job that then I can use to, for the career that I want to do moving forward. But yeah, I think the key thing is you guys are coming out with an amazing education. You're in the right spot. And I think there are opportunities out there too, even though I think that the job market may not be great, there are opportunities out there.
So what I'm going to do for Q&A is I'm going to go around the room. Since we've got a small group, I'm going to let you introduce yourself to Mike. If you're shy, you can politely pass. And then if you have a question, go ahead and ask that question to Mike. And if you don't have a question, just say, I don't have a question at this time. And we'll start right up here at the front row.
Hi, I'm Nayeli Ramirez. Nice to meet you. I just wanted to ask, when exactly did you know you wanted to change or explore a different role or a different industry, switching from General Dynamics to Qualcomm?
Yeah, I kind of just, and I don't think I realized this until probably my second or third move, is I like to go in and look at things that are maybe not operationally efficient and make them operationally efficient. And then once they're operationally efficient, then it's like, I've done my job. I need to go do something. And it was weird. And I don't even know why but it was always like that 7-year kind of period. And, they talk about kind of the 7-year itch, and, maybe that is, I had a career 7-year itch. And thank goodness I was able to have multiple iterations of my career at Qualcomm. And, so yeah, that, I think it was around the operational efficiency that I felt like I had already done where I needed to do. It was time to find something else to get involved in.
Thank you.
Thank you, Nayeli. Go ahead.
Hi, thank you for coming. My name is Emma, and I'm curious. You talked about how in Aztec Link it's more of an entrepreneurial startup environment, and I'm kind of curious, whether I want to go into more of a startup environment or being within a specified role. And I'm curious, which one did you appreciate more now, and then did you evolve into that preference, or was that always?
Yeah, I would say I loved being part of a bigger company, right? Because there is security in being in a larger company, and the good thing with both of those companies, right, is and probably it definitely didn't work Qualcomm, it was still entrepreneurial. So it felt like, I would tell that to people that were interviewing. It's like, this is a big company. We have 30,000 employees or whatever we had at the time. But it did not feel like that. So I think I like the structure around that and this more security. But now at this point in my career, to be able to, be involved in it, man, it's a blast. Because I literally feel like every day I'm learning something new. And the person I worked with, J.R. Tolbert, comes from an entrepreneurial background. He has multiple small businesses, and it's interesting because we look at things so differently. But it's a great synergy because he looks at it from, we got to kind of bootstrap this and get this done. And I'm like, yeah, we need to do that, but we also need to figure out how are we going to deal with this long term. And we talk about this a lot. It's like, man, that's a great combination because we have both perspectives, and then we land, somewhere in the middle of what we're going to end up doing. But I think you had everybody that had that entrepreneurial piece, it would be, you wouldn't have the ability to balance ideas on somebody from a different perspective, which I think is helpful.
Thank you.
Great questions.
My name is Naveed, and I was wondering, you spoke about networking. What are some ways that people have reached out to you that you stood out and like, oh, I'm gonna talk about this person?
So I'll tell the intern story. So I approached Greg about trying to get some help because it literally was JR and I trying to get this thing off the ground, and we had too many things that we wanted to focus some more on the strategic stuff and let some of the other stuff get it off of our plate. And so Greg, came to us and said, hey, I've got 4 people that you can talk to about internships. And we talked to the first one, and he's like, we all want to do this. Why do you even choose one? Let's all, we all want to work in your group. And I was like, you realize you're not getting paid, and we're going to be asking you to do as much as you can do. And they're like, yeah, we want to do that. So I was blown away by that. And then the other thing is now those 4 are out trying to get other people to help because we have kind of these, hey, we have this we can kind of segment things up and say, hey, there's this other piece that we need a little bit of help with. So yeah, I've been really, really blown away by the fact that people want to help. And again, I think we're in a really good spot because this is all new. So people, especially in the sports MBA program, man, this is, if they can get exposure to NIL, it's super important. So I don't know if I answered your question.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Jonathan. I'm a veteran, and I was in defense contracting for a couple of years alongside General Economics.
Thank you for your service.
And it's interesting hearing your path and that you just didn't really know exactly what you wanted to do, or you weren't exactly feeling that it was a great long-term fit, but you kept, progressing into different roles and diversifying yourself, and eventually found this where you're happy where you're at. I guess my question is, somebody that is coming from engineering and is going to the whole different finance. I'm trying to find something that's a good fit. That's super important. And if you could do it all over again, what would be a way of just kind of maybe speeding up that process and finding what is a good fit for you? I'm sorry, I know that's a broad question.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that the key thing is you kind of try things out and then you're gonna be like this feels right, or I want to explore this a little bit. And probably like when I left Qualcomm, I knew I wanted to get involved in doing something. I kind of put together a list of here are things that I want to go explore. And I also think when you start to kind of put yourself out there and you start explaining to people, here's what I'm thinking, people will say, well, here's, something you may want to think about. So I think kind of starting to socialize that, and that's probably too, like even when I was, thought I was going to leave Qualcomm and in these different segments, starting to socialize, because there's risk in doing that, right? Well, you're going to leave, then we're not going to include you in this. And I just, was very open with people that I want to be transparent. If I don't want to, I do want to do something different. So I think, sometimes you got to put yourself out there to have those kind of discussions. And, for me, at least, that all worked out. I never felt like I got that it was a negative what I was trying to do.
Yeah, and what you asked is what a lot of people ask, so I'll just piggyback on your answer there. So Mike had mentioned that when you network to make relationships, right? So imagine sitting down with a lot of people like Mike and having the type of conversation that we have today. So you kind of heard about some of the things he did. Does that interest you? If you sit down with someone in finance, about what they do, does that interest you, right? You can only do so many internships. You can only have so many job roles, but you can talk to an unlimited number of people like Mike, right? Thank you for the question.
Hi, my name is Charlie Wells, and I sent you a link to the request a couple weeks back and you accepted. It's great, so thank you for that.
Yeah.
I know some of your account you mentioned, you look at your list of your Clifton strengths. Is there any other like personality professional tests like that you recommend doing as well?
Yeah, I think I've done every one of them. I would say Strength Finders is by far the best, and I've taken it multiple times, and the strengths, they may change a little bit, your top 5, but man, it's I think it's very, very accurate. And my kids have done it, my wife's done it, and we talk about the strengths a lot because I actually had at Qualcomm, I had my whole team did it in 2 different orgs, because I think it's good to understand what people's strengths are, and then you can kind of go, hey, this is what they really like to do. And it's not like you're doing it to try and change what they're not good at. It's like, if that's something they're good at, let's leverage it. So yeah, that's the one I definitely that resonated with me. Good question.
Hi, my name is Casper. Thank you so much for being here, by the way. So I don't really have a specific question necessarily, but I recently got interviewed for a finance and accounting internship at Qualcomm. I was wondering if you have any advice for the second interview, possibly.
Yeah, I would say that the finance intern or I don't know about internships there, but they have a rotational program within finance, and it's amazing because you see all the different aspects of the business. And I don't know if a lot of companies do that, but if you can get into that, you will learn a ton about the business. So yeah, if you have an opportunity, man, that would be a good one.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was looking for.
Yeah, and I think I think that is an area where because typically what ends up happening, the people that go through that rotation program, they come out with such good experience, they plug them into a lot of different areas, so that they're typically always looking for people to go in the rotation program.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, good luck to you.
Yeah.
I'm Roman. First of all, I'd like to stay up here for this interesting insight. So, I have a lot of questions. I don't have a specific question.
Yeah. But Roman, you have a lot of experience on the supply chain side internationally, right?
Yeah, mostly trade, supply chain,
Yeah. You speak multiple languages, Russian, Chinese.
Good.
Yeah, right.
Okay.
So I'll ask a question for him, right? What's a good fit on one of your teams for someone like Roman?
Oh man, somebody that I think being able to speak Chinese is a huge value, and I think just on the supply chain side, a lot of our foundries and test partners are in China, so that ability to interact is huge.
Who should he talk to? Should he talk to Natalie?
Yeah, it would be more on the chip supply chain side. If you want to connect up with me on LinkedIn, I'll see if I can put you in contact with. And again, this again is a challenging time, right? As Qualcomm is not doing a lot of hiring, but again, establishing kind of those relationships. At some point, they're going to hire again, and they are still there for as well.
All right, thank you, Roman. Thank you. Thank you for coming in today. Yourself?
Hi, I'm Marcel. Thank you for coming and for your advice. I would like to know, since you tell us that you face, or have different roles in Qualcomm, and obviously you deal with a lot of teams, people. What would be your recommendation when trying to develop the skills of your team? Let's say because you were in different positions and each team had their own, let's say, skills and their own way to do the work. But what would be the most important when you're, let's say, in a management position or in a big position, to do to make your team grow and also accomplish the results that the company wants, like, how do you think that balance?
I think the biggest thing is making sure that they see the vision of what we need to do as a team and how that benefits the company. Because I think if you don't articulate what the value of what you're doing in the bigger picture, it's not like people may do it, but they don't see I think they're more kind of invested if they see how what we're doing, and I talked about the fact that in my last role where we were providing the hardware to the engineering teams, that they understood the fact that, because people will complain, right? It's like, well, why are we getting less time to do our job? And it's like, number one, we're a support organization, a very important support organization, but also that's what we, the value that we bring. So I think probably articulating the vision is one of the bigger things. Somebody had asked a question earlier too. We ran the operation through COVID, through all the lockdowns. We had 350 people on site every day. We never shut down during COVID. And I mentioned earlier to somebody, that was probably one of the most complex, challenging things that I ever dealt with, because you needed to make sure, I'm going off on a tangent, but you needed to make sure that people were safe, because if we started to have an outbreak and people did not feel safe, people wouldn't come to work. And, at that point, the engineers were all working from home. So the hardware that we were producing was even more important because they were remotely using the hardware that we were producing. So I think, and again, I think a lot of that was now coming back and saying, here's why this is super important that we're continuing to operate. Here's the vision of how we're going to do it. So I know I went up on a bit of a tangent, but I did want to talk about that, managing through kind of COVID.
Thanks, good question.
Hey there, my name is TJ, and I was just wondering if there's a common mistake that you see, like within the first year of a new employee, like starting, something common that you think, they should be aware of.
I don't know that it's really a kind of a mistake, but don't be. You need to kind of have challenging, things that you're making decisions, and then hopefully you have a supportive manager that again will just kind of course correct you if there's something that, hey, maybe we should have done this differently. And that was one of the things that I always try to do is, you have some managers that are like, get upset, especially with more, lower level people. It's like, that's not the way, right? Then they're going to become gun shy. They're not going to want to make decisions or do things. So I would say, try and stretch yourself and maybe establish two kind of mentors that you can bounce ideas off of. I always found that, being able to kind of say, hey, here's what I'm thinking. Do you think that this is the right approach? Is another thing. So, yeah, and I think you'll realize too, that the good bosses and the not so good bosses, and the good bosses are trying to support you. And, thank goodness, I think probably out of mine, I probably had only one or two that I would consider, not a good boss. And that was, you realize that fairly quickly. And it's like, okay, time to either move to something else, or especially at Qualcomm, they would get chewed up and, they would get exposed pretty quickly. So never really had to worry about that for a long period of time.
All right, thank you.
Hi, my name is Farah. I am a fourth-year accounting major, and I'm not in this class, but I'm doing a research paper on Qualcomm and the inductive strategies and financial performances, accounting policies, but what I think, a question I have that would best fit your expertise is what is the significant strategic risk that potentially would like impede the company from achieving its objectives?
Wow.
What do you think is like a big strategic, like a significant strategic risk that it could be?
Yeah, I mean, I would say, and I think Qualcomm has done a great job of trying to diversify the revenue, right? Is you look at your cell phone and, you know, there's not like this, it's not like you're seeing technology evolution now where it's like, man, the new iPhone came out, I gotta go get the new iPhone, right? You may get it, you know, okay, yeah, I'll get it when my phone dies or, right? So I think Qualcomm saw this coming, right? That when the technology was really ramping quickly, there was going to be this churn of people buying new cell phones, and they realized that at some point that starts to plateau, and that's where, you know, Qualcomm made the strategic decision probably 10 years ago to diversify and make sure that they weren't just a mobile company. So that's probably the biggest thing, is to just make sure that those adjacent markets are, you know, they're winning, you know, business in those other markets.
Thank you. We'll come to the back of the room to my colleagues.
Hey, I'm Michelle Fay. I work with Greg in the Career Management Center, and the questions like with MVP would be here.
Sure.
And I'm Danny Ector, I'm the Career Development. I also work with Greg and Michelle, and I work with
Great.
Mike, that was beautiful. We really appreciate all of that great advice. Thank you all for coming out. You are the reason that we hold the event. Best of luck to all of you. Come visit us at the Career Management Center, LH 336.